So a gentleman walks into our office and he says, I've had a wonderful career. I've been disciplined. I've saved. My advisor even says, I'm well diversified. Diversification isn't always what it seems. As we looked at this, he owned 18 different mutual funds.
Impressive looking on the surface, different fund names, different fund managers, different fund strategies.
And as we did an analysis, we realized he still had 90% of his portfolio that moved with the market almost every day.
Welcome back to the On Track Retirement Show, a show designed to cut through the retirement confusion. Our purpose of this show is to help you get on track, stay on track, and have a confident retirement. I'm Pat Schmidt.
My name is Jay Karate. Welcome.
We are so blessed and thankful, first and foremost, before we get going, just the interaction. Thank you for the messages. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing and doing all the other things young people do when it relates to seeing this on social media. It's been really awesome. One of the things we said early on, Jay, is that, we are not commentators, right? What are we?
Right. We're advisors. We want to give advice.
Yeah, we are practitioners, right? So, the substance that comes from these, the content that comes from is really coming from the heart. It's not just from the two of us. It's coming from our advisors. One of our advisors reached out, Jay, and he was like, "Hey, when are they going to talk about me on the show?" He said, "They helped me do that. Were you guys talking about me?" And that, so some of these examples, we do change the names a little bit to modify, and but we're having a lot of fun. So thank you again so much. And again, this is really coming from a heart where we want to serve people and put people in a better situation. And so thank you so much. And we're glad to hear that this is being a blessing to so many people out there.
Absolutely. Today, as we're talking about this illusion of diversification, it's something that is so important that we have this thought process that diversification is good. And it is. But it can also be a little bit of this thing called an illusion.
It's certainly an illusion. The gentleman you made mention just a moment ago, right? 90% of his assets moving with the market, right? It felt diversified, but at the end of the day, it was a different wrapper, but inside the wrapper was all the same things, right?
And we see this, and again, there's no malice, there's no fault of anybody doing that. It's kind of what it is, and we kind of get into this almost this feeling of complacency that, well, I'm diversified, and I've got money here and here and here, and so that's fine. But it's that same basis, even though that wrapper may feel a little bit different.
It's the hey, I don't want to have all my eggs in the same basket approach, right? So, the person that may have their investments over here or, CD, bank accounts, annuity, and all of these different things, never mind the coordination or lack of coordination that can happen with those things. But then you also have folks that feel like they're diversified because they feel like their eggs are not all in the same basket, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we want to do in this process is we help bring clarity. One of the C's in our alliteration that we use on a regular basis is confidence. We want people to retire with confidence. That confidence is something that we even have something titled a retirement confidence score. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit and how we look at this. When we went and saw that this gentleman's retirement portfolio had 18 different mutual funds, and now we're talking about confidence. Even though it's still in the market, there's that feeling. But what is this thing that we call the retirement confidence score?
Yeah, and maybe before we get into that, if we don't mind maybe just camping here, people are hearing the word mutual fund, Jay, and I never want to take the approach that people understand what that is. So if somebody is hearing the words mutual fund for the very first time, can you give us the 101 retirement version of what a mutual fund is?
Used to be years ago that if we wanted 1,000 different things in our portfolio, we had to have 1,000 different opportunities to purchase.
Right.
What's happened, it's kind of bundled as everything is bundled today with your internet and your phone and all those things that we use that word bundle so frequently. This basically is a bundle of hundreds, if not thousands of different holdings, but it's only got one ticker symbol.
Right. Yeah. So inside of there, you may have hundreds of stocks, thousands of stocks, or maybe a component of stocks and bonds inside of there.
Right.
So if you have one mutual fund, yeah, you have a level of diversification, but you start getting 2, 3, 18. Well, in those 18 mutual funds, you may have the same stock in each of those. Right. One of the analysis that we will run for folks and use behind the scenes, we don't necessarily share it with everybody because it may bore them, but is a stock intersection report. Well, what that will show is that, okay, let's say you own Amazon, right? In that one mutual fund, well, you may actually own it across 17 or 18 different funds. Well, that can create a lot of heavy weight into one holding, and all of a sudden people are taking on far too much risk because nobody can necessarily know what is in all those mutual funds just by looking at that ticker symbol. But in that fund, there's a lot of different holdings. And so that can really concentrate somebody into something specific, right?
It can. In that, again, we have to keep, I think, this understanding of what is confidence. As we work with our clients, as we have an opportunity to intersect with people in a very interesting world, we want them to understand that confidence. Ultimately, our goal is as you put your head on your pillow at night, you have peace because you're confident. You're not wondering what if. We can, not all the time, but if we can minimize that what if scenario, and that's where confidence comes in. Yeah. That's where we have the opportunity to say, here's where you are currently, and here's where you could be, but there has to be a plan to get there.
And so stress testing those mutual funds in different market conditions can lead to that. So let's talk about that retirement confidence score. Really, the retirement confidence score is built around 5 key areas. It's built for income reliability, it's built for market risk exposure, for tax efficiency, for those healthcare realities or making sure people have preparedness as it relates to healthcare. And then it's also the drag on fees, right? So there's these 5, you can maybe even put them as 6. Often we'll use the acronym of the word impact, right? I is income plan. I'll put myself to the test here.
That's right.
Spelling. I is income plan. M is market safe part of your plan. Your P is your proactive tax strategy. Your A is your asset protection or estate plan and making sure you're not leaving a mess for your loved ones. It's having that care plan and being prepared for those healthcare realities. And then T is transparency, specifically, Jay, as it relates to fees and cost. And I believe it's our next podcast. We're actually going to pull back the curtain and talk about those fees in greater detail. But this in particular can really add a lot of clarity and a lot of confidence, pun intended, by making sure people have preparedness as it relates to those 5, 6 key areas.
And as we talk about income, which is so important, let's skip ahead and go kind of into that market world is what we're going to talk about with this diversification. When we think about what it's like in the market, one of the myths, a couple episodes ago, we talked about myths that people have in retirement, and one that is a myth out there is, I probably really shouldn't be in the market. Let's just stay away from them. Let's go to bonds and cash and not worry about anything. Well, we do need to have some money in the market because we do want to capture some of those upside gains, but it has to be a risk tolerance that makes sense. It has to be something that the exposure is there, and it has to be safe. That word safe doesn't necessarily mean pull out of the market, but it's a safe, equitable understanding of what it looks like to be in the market. So as we're in the market, where are we in the market? How much are we in the market? Yeah. What's the exposure to it? What are the fees that are involved in some of these mutual funds versus other investment options that may have zero or very, very low fee structure? So it's not just market risk, but it's how market risk is kind of the splash, but the ripple and how it looks through retirement as well.
So in so many ways, it's first and foremost, you need to have understanding of what's in those mutual funds, right? And what the illusion of diversification is because you don't know what you have. Right. So step one is getting some understanding of what's inside there. What are actually in all of those investment types, whether they're mutual funds, whether they're variable annuities, all of those have some different underlying holdings to them. And so getting clarity and getting understanding is part one, right? If your car had trouble starting this morning, you're going to take it to the dealership and they're going to hook it up and do a diagnostic test, right? So step one for so many people is having that diagnostic test.
Right.
And talk a little bit about the stress test and how you can stress test a portfolio. And there's some really cool tools out there that retirement advisors like ourselves and our team can use.
There are, and oddly enough, the confidence not only for the client, but it brings us confidence knowing that these tools work. That's what's really fun, that we can say with confidence, here are some things that could take place in your portfolio. Again, we use a lot of the if-then kind of idea. If this happens, then these are the results. So in that stress test, we look and see where people are currently. We look and see where your current investments are. We look and see where your holdings may be. And this, again, this diversification understanding of what all that looks like. Then we go and literally, much like when we go to the doctor and hop on a treadmill and have all the wires attached to us to do a stress test, say of our heart or our lungs if we're breathing, we put that same pressure. We don't want to put too much pressure one side or the other. You need to be able to have some level of tension there. But that stress test then goes, if we were to run into, say, a 2008 market situation that was just an awful bear market and people lost upwards of 40% of their assets, what happens if and when that happens? Wouldn't it be great if we had the crystal ball to say that we know on February 15th of next year, this is when the market's going to go down? We don't have that. But we have to be prepared in case something were to take place.
Yeah. And maybe not even in case, right?
It's when.
Yeah,
it's when.
Exactly, right? If you were asked, is it a matter of if or when we have that next big market downturn? It's just a matter of when, right? Not a matter of if. And for a retiree out there that's going to have 20, 30 some year retirement, they're likely going to see a couple, significant setbacks during that time. And so making sure that their investment strategy is best prepared to weather those types of storms is incredibly important. So number one is making sure that you have understanding and clarity of where you're at right now, whether you're nearing retirement or whether you're currently in retirement, understanding exactly how much risk that you're taking. There is that illusion of diversification. So wipe away the illusion and know that if you truly do have diversification. So many ways, Jay, I feel like the investment world, right? I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute. But the investment world, the wealth managers of the world, if you will, make investing way too complicated.
Absolutely.
Way too complicated. And maybe that's to justify the fees. Hook here, come back to the next podcast and we'll tell you a little bit about those fees and costs a little bit more in detail. But making things so much more complicated, and maybe that is truly a way for them to justify the heavy fees and costs that these wealth managers charge. I think that's part of it. And maybe helping them validate kind of what they do. But I think if you ask a lot of those wealth managers, they don't even know what's in those funds, right? Without pulling specific reports. So I think there's also an element. Yeah, number one is understand how much risk that you're taking. And number two, make sure that your risk aligns with your specific goals, your specific needs, right? Tailoring that to them. So let's talk about that individual that you mentioned at the onset here. In so many ways, knowing, you and I talked about, this case, and now all of a sudden there's been some segmentation done. Mm-hmm. And let's expand on that. There's, a plan in place now for income, specifically income over the next 10 years, right? So there's a game plan for the income part, and then there's a game plan for the growth and accumulation part. And what that allows that growth and accumulation part is to just breathe. Right? Because now income, the floor, if you've ever tuned in before, that is the floor and the foundation of every great retirement plan. So talk about a little bit of that process and a little bit of just at how much that's put that person at ease moving forward.
It is. And watching that exhale take place, we can see it physically, we can see it certainly as somebody does that exhale, but also the understanding of how is it that we are just able to truly breathe, and we can see the stress almost kind of come out of their face a little bit. I'd like to say that the crow's feet disappear a little bit, but they don't. But there's maybe a little bit more smile and we can see it. One of the things in that stress test that we look at as well that helps them understand how we're able to see this is if, let's say, you've got a $700,000 portfolio and you think there's this diversification, you've got all these different mutual funds and different holdings that present this illusion. What happens when we have that time? My guess is that if they were to lose, say, a third. Let's say that somehow in there they've got about $300,000 that could be lost in the market. Chances are great that if they added $300,000 to their portfolio, it might make their retirement a little bit more comfortable. They might take a nicer trip, might add an extra week to the cruise, whatever it's going to be. But what happens if you go from 700,000 to 400,000? Panic sets in. Even the thought of it, you can see people going, "Oh, I don't want that to happen." Even when we share it, there's often a little bit of a pit in our stomachs, kind of going, "Hate to be the bearer of bad news. We want to be truthful. We want to be forthright and say, here's what your exposure looks like currently. If you want to stay there, it's your money. You do with it what you want. But here's what that looks like."
I love that question. If you use a 700,000, doesn't matter if it's 700,000, 200,000, or
2 million. Doesn't matter what it is.
Exactly. For that 700,000, would your retirement change if your 700,000 grew to $1 million? And I think most people will tell you probably not. We're going to live the same retirement and do a lot of the same things. But if that 700,000 lost 300,000 and went to 400,000, now what's retirement going to look like? And that is going to significantly change folks.
Yeah.
And so in this conversation you had, as you're running the stress test and you're in so many ways revealing, hey, there is an illusion of diversification here. And now all of a sudden, if we have a 2008 today, or if it's next year or the following year, the average baby boomer, Jay, lost nearly 45% of their net worth. Yeah. And it wasn't like it was this long time. It was like this.
Right now.
Right? You've heard me use this analogy. The stock market is far more like a tornado than it is a hurricane. Right. And what I mean by that is, if you think about that analogy, the hurricane often, these crazy weather people, they'll start talking about the hurricane sometimes, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance. They don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to make landfall. They don't know exactly how bad that it's going to be, but they know that it's going to be, pretty significant. Right. The hurricane gets a name, for crying out loud. The tornado, you ever seen a tornado get a name?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Me neither, right? But the tornado can pop up just like, hear me on this. Both of them can be incredibly devastating as storms. But the tornado can pop up and wipe away so much in such a short period of time. To me, the stock market is far more like a tornado because of that brevity, because of that speed, that urgency. There was a lot of folks that, in 2000, and even in more recent memory, they looked at their statement 1 month, and then they looked at it the following month, and it was a world of difference. Well, when you have a 10, 8, and almost 6-year-old at home, right, and the market goes backwards, there's recovery and bounce back time. But when you are near retirement, you're in retirement, you don't have that kind of recovery or bounce back time to weather those types of storms. So making sure, and wouldn't you much rather see that analysis on paper and see those losses, I should say, in an analysis versus seeing those losses on an actual statement, right? It
is. And to your point about the kids at home versus your world and our world. And that's something that my wife and I talk about, is what does our retirement look like? Because we are closer to that. And so I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I have too much fun doing what I'm doing. It may never take place. I don't know. They take me out of the office, on the stretcher at some point. But I love doing what we're doing.
We're not letting you leave, pal.
But whenever that takes place, that is a conversation, and it's very, very real. And today, right now, we're as old as we've ever been, and we don't know what tomorrow looks like until we're through with today. But when we have a plan in place, when we understand some of those forecasts, those understandings of what if, again, I say that on a regular basis, what if, let's plan and have some type of idea so that we can have that peace, we can have some clarity, we can have some confidence. We can live our life without worrying every day. I'm not sure anybody reads the paper anymore, but reading the paper and seeing what the stock market did, we can see it in real time. But understanding these things that we think we know, but maybe we don't, because it's such common language. Yet I don't know that we know really what the meanings of some of these words are, and that's where that illusion of diversification comes in. So obviously, there's a great opportunity to realign folks as it relates to their investment strategy for income. Growth certainly still becomes significantly important. But diversification, people hear the word diversification and all they think is their investments, right? They think of being allocated appropriately based off of the market risk or market potential.
But real diversification, Jay, is so much more than that. So it's not just aligning for growth potential, right? Let's move into the second part here. Real diversification is way more than that. You want to kick us off?
We have taxes we need to be concerned about. How are we diversified in our tax situation? Money that hasn't been taxed, that's been saved on a pre-tax basis, will be taxed at some point. Doesn't matter where it's going to take place, doesn't matter how it's going to take place. Somebody somewhere, somehow, is going to be taxed on those dollars. So when we think about our taxation, when we think about having money that is pre-taxed and then moving part of that plan over to some type of tax-free or tax savings accounts that we know it's going to be a lot easier on down the road, whether it goes to our spouse or to our children, to our grandchildren or nieces or nephews. If we can handle some of that tax understanding now, that's part of the diversification I don't think is ever talked about at great length. We kind of go, let's just keep making more money. Let's keep making more money. We'll worry about taxes later.
We're going to talk about this more in future weeks. But true tax diversification, I believe, is just as important, if not more important, than investment diversification. What do we mean by tax diversification? That means making sure you have assets that are in not just tax deferred, right? Those 401ks, 403bs, 450, all those IRA accounts, those accounts haven't been taxed yet. So many baby boomers have all of their wealth, all of their money concentrated, Jay, in those accounts. That's not great tax diversification, right? If anything, they're setting themselves up for a massive tax time bomb, hitting some significant penalties that we'll speak to about wanting to make sure that you avoid. So true diversification as it relates to taxes is making sure that you have investments that are in tax-free types of strategies, things that have the ability to grow tax-free and be tax-free in terms of monies and income that you take out during those retirement years, but also making sure that as you prepare money to then, we're about to experience the greatest wealth transfer, Jay, in the history of this country. And Uncle Sam is waiting on a big payday to happen with that wealth transfer, right? There's a reason there's no panic in Washington, D.C. about this national debt and spending money for wars and everything else, right? And that's because the majority of the net worth in this country is owned by baby boomers. And where do baby boomers have most of their money, Jay?
401ks.
Yeah, 401ks. It's those traditional IRAs, right? So your contributions out there, your work matches and the work employer contributions, those dollars haven't been taxed yet. Those dollars will be taxed, right? Either by you, the owner of those accounts, your spouse, when they inherit those accounts, or when those monies go to your kids or your beneficiaries, those dollars are going to absolutely be taxed, right?
It's going to be huge. The different statistics based on who you listen to or what you read show somewhere around 11 to 14,000 people a day are turning 65 currently. And then we've got that baby boomer and kind of the those just beyond that. I think Gen X is the next line. And so they're coming into that. Statistics also show that there could be as much as 53, 54, 55% of all the national personal net worth owned by that segment of population. 110, 115 trillion dollars they're going to transfer at some point. Somebody's paying taxes on this.
And so the government passed a law, January 2020. They called it the Secure Act, and then there was a second version of that just a couple years later. And they positioned the Secure Act as a way to help retirees secure their retirement. What a load of what, because it is truly a way, what they've now done is those final beneficiaries, when they receive, say, mom and dad's money, now they got to pay taxes at their tax rate, right? And they have a 10-year window. So when this wealth transfer happens of these 401ks, of these IRA dollars, right? What a massive tax trap that becomes as those kids now get clobbered on taxes, specifically as tax rates continue to rise. So having tax efficiency or having a tax diversification, I don't care what your age is, it's never too, it can be too late, but it's never too early, right? So even if you're thinking about your grandkids, your kids, and making sure that they are well diversified as they get to retirement, but even those folks, Jay, who are in retirement, making sure that they start to diversify their strategy as it relates to taxes is massively important.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit, nobody likes to pay taxes. The idea of even having tax conversations, again, pardon me, give people kind of the willies about, oh golly, what about taxes? And that April 15th deadline every year, that what do I owe, what do I get back? This game that we're playing a little bit with our taxes. If we pay taxes on our schedule versus the government schedule, we're going to pay less in taxes.
Yeah.
And that's what's so important, that again, nobody wants to pay more. If it's done with clarity, if it's done with an understanding as to why, we have to answer that question, why this is important. Again, I use often that splash and the ripple. Put a rock in the water and it makes this great splash, but it's the ripple that can cause some of that problem. And the money is the splash, which is a good thing. What does that ripple effect look like for the rest of those people in our sphere of influence? And so if we have a conscious conversation about that to clearly help understand why we're able to do it, what makes sense, why it's beneficial, why does it make sense to pay taxes today versus 10 years from now, and who that impacts. If part of our retirement plan, I think most people want to have some level of legacy if they're saving hard for that. If that impacts that legacy in such a profound way that they certainly wouldn't be here upon their passing, yet can forecast what that looks like for those loved ones, that's a big statement.
Listen, if you're out there listening right now, I'm like, and we've had a lot of these where like, I wish my person had been talking about these things. I'm not hearing these things, and I'm finally hearing these things. Now, for a lot of our clients, of our group who have been listening, this has been great affirmation about I'm getting these things. These are the things that I'm doing. But if this is new to you, this is a foreign concept, go to myontrackretirement.com. You can engage with our team. We love the opportunity to have a complimentary consultation to see how we can help diversify you as it relates to taxes, certainly the investments. But let's talk about the maybe the last one we'll hit today, Jay. When we think of diversification, this is one that's going to maybe blow people's mind as they don't think about it, but healthcare. There's a diversification that needs to happen here. Talk about how healthcare relates to that retirement confidence score.
One of the things through healthcare, the old adage, if you have your health, you have everything. If you lose your health, you just don't know what you didn't have until it's gone. And that's a bit of a daunting statement, especially as an aging population spends more time at doctors. You have conversations when you go to dinner, not about what your kids are doing, but what medicines you're on, to see how that works at that particular time in life. But healthcare and the expense that goes into healthcare, it's not getting cheaper. We know that.
Yeah.
We know that with more people, there's a supply and demand issue with long-term care. Long-term care, from beyond just going to the doctor and seeing what we might need or blood pressure medications we're on, this thing called long-term care, approximately 70% of everybody 65 and older in America is going to need some type of long-term care, where that's somebody coming to the house, going to assisted living, skilled facilities, full-on memory care that, again, it's not necessarily a comfortable conversation to have, but a conversation that still needs to be had. The costs in these areas are remarkable. Assisted living alone is approximately $7,000 on average around the country per month. The average stay is approximately 3 years. That's $250,000 right now. And Medicare doesn't pay for it.
Yeah, and the reality, Jay, is in all reality, the financial stress that can come in retirement often can be related to these unexpected long-term care services, right?
Right. Yeah. Nothing can destroy somebody's nest egg.
What's
like
the good news? Yeah, we're hitting with them. There's a lot of bad news.
A lot of bad news. The good news is there are plans and options that we have for this. There are ways that we can plan for that. And again, answer that what if. We have opportunities to say, here's where we have dollars. Here's ways that we can forecast this. And if it's not needed, that's okay. There are options that we have that's there as well. But it is something that we do have good plans that would give an option for people to have something other than, what do I do?
People like a scoreboard,
they do,
right? And whether it's at your work, whether it's whatever it might be, right? Sports and all the things, it's good to keep score. You and I are still old school, I guess, when it comes to that. But retirement shouldn't be about getting a participation trophy.
No. Right?
It should be about having peace of mind and having great clarity, having great confidence. So that retirement confidence score, simply put, it is on a scale of 0 to 99, 99 being the highest score that somebody can achieve. And getting that high confidence score right? You don't get to just look at somebody and being like, you look like an 85.
That's
you know,
right.
I mean, there's analysis that comes into the analysis, which provides you understanding, clarity of what you have, but more importantly, a path forward on how you address it, on how you fix it. And when you start to now put a game plan in place for income, for your investments, for taxes, for your healthcare plan, you eliminate those excessive fees and unnecessary costs. All of a sudden now that can really jolt that retirement confidence score.
And peace, clarity, confidence, peace. These things that are so important that are tangible yet intangible all at the same time. If we can take it from an intangible to a tangible and create a plan that people know how it looks, what the options are, knowing that in this world, again, you mentioned 99, there is no perfect score. There is nothing perfect in this world outside of one person maybe. But when we understand what that looks like, that there's just an opportunity for people to go, I have a plan.
So if there's one takeaway for today, just because you own multiple investments or lots of investments, or maybe even just a few investments, that does not necessarily mean that you are truly diversified. Diversification is about having a great game plan when it comes to taxes, to long-term care, segmenting your assets when it relates to things like income. Growth is still obviously of great importance, but making sure that you're stepping through that and using the best tools possible for growth, but also being mindful of the fees and costs of the tools that you're using as well. All of those things can collectively create an incredible confidence, a great confidence score, and peace of mind that you can live out your very best retirement without any worries or fears.
Completely true. And as we execute that, that's now how we're able to help people get on track, stay on track, and have a confident retirement. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great pleasure being able to share some of these thoughts with you. We'll look forward to chatting again next time.
We'll see you next week.